Do you want to sleep? Then listen to me. Turn off the lights, close the windows, now close them and listen to you. Finally, I will make a request to you. Put down your phone and listen to my voice. Listen clearly. I will now tell you a story that will make you sleepy. Close your eyes and listen carefully to my words.
Before the fall of any kingdom, there must first be a beginning. Long before castles touched the clouds, before crowns glittered in torchlight, before kings commanded armies with the lift of a finger, humanity lived quietly under the open sky. The earliest kings were not born from gold or glory. They rose from fear. Fear of the flood, fear of the drought, fear of the night sky filled with strange wandering stars. People needed someone to point to the heavens and say, "Do not worry. I understand the will of the gods. I will protect you." Thus, the first kings did not sit on thrones. They stood beside sacred fires, whispering to the spirits, pretending they could hear them whisper back. In ancient Sumer, in the land between the rivers, the earliest rulers were priest kings. Ensi, guardians of temples, keepers of grain, recorders of omens. Their crowns were simple rings of woven reeds. Their palaces were barely more than mud bricks halls. Yet to the people, they were chosen by the gods themselves. From here, kingship spread like dawnlight over the world. Egypt crowned divine pharaohs. China raised legendary sage kings. India remembered the rulers of ancient Bharat. Europe whispered myths of giants and sacred kings long before history was written. But with every rise came a seed of downfall. Because power grows heavy, because a crown burns the longer it rests on a single head, because no king, however mighty, can stop the turning of time. And so the story begins, not with the fall, but with the moment humanity first believed someone could stand above them. A belief that would shape civilizations, build empires, and eventually destroy them. The first throne was built on sand. Long before iron crowns and golden scepters glittered beneath torchlight, there was only wind, sand, and ambition. The first would-be king, Azeron the Wanderer, was not born into power. He had no palace, no army, not even a place to sleep that wasn't stolen by the night winds. But he carried something far more dangerous, an unbreakable belief that the world needed order and that he was the one to bring it. Azeron traveled from village to village across the ancient drylands, watching people struggle to survive. Water was scarce, food was scattered, and every group lived alone, suspicious of strangers, afraid of raiders who roamed the dunes. But Azeron saw an idea shimmering on the horizon like a mirage. If I can bring them together, even the smallest tribes can become stronger than the desert itself. He began with stories, simple ones, told beside campfires. Stories about unity, about protection, about a leader chosen not by birth, but by courage and wisdom. People listened. Then they argued. Then they followed. By the time he reached the salt cliffs of Akkar, Azeron had gathered 60 families behind him. Not soldiers, people. People who wanted safety, stability, hope. But the desert didn't care about dreams. One night, a violent sandstorm rolled across the plains like a living creature. It swallowed tents, tore apart supplies, and left Azeron's followers half blind and terrified. The next morning, they confronted him. "Why should we follow you? Your words can't stop the storms. We should return to our old lives." Azeron stood atop a broken dune, exhausted, and looked at the destruction. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Storms destroy what is weak, so we will become strong." He picked up the largest fallen tent pole, drove it into the sand, and tied what little fabric remained to it. A symbol, a first pillar, a promise. Around him, the people slowly did the same. By nightfall, a crude circle of shelter stood around the central fire. It wasn't much. It wasn't safe. But it was the beginning. Ages later would call Azeron's settlement the First Throne, a kingdom born from nothing but willpower, a kingdom whose rise and fall would echo across all future kings. But for now, it was only a spark in the darkness, waiting to ignite history. The first crown ever forged. Long before kings sat on thrones of marble, before armies marched, before palaces rose, there was only a world of wandering tribes and the thin, flickering idea of leadership. No crowns, no kingdoms, only survival. But deep in an ancient valley, enclosed by mountains that caught the sun like polished shields, a small tribe gathered around a dying fire. They were starving, exhausted, and directionless after a year of storms that washed away their homes. And then came a moment that changed world history. A young hunter named Eredon stood up. Not the strongest, not the oldest, not the bravest, just the only one willing to say the words everyone feared. "Follow me, I'll lead us out." It wasn't a command, it was a promise. And for the first time in human memory, a tribe agreed to follow one person completely. Eredon guided them through forests, across rivers, and over mountains. He hunted for them. He made peace with other tribes. He taught them to store food, to organize, to trust. And when they finally reached a fertile plain, the place they would build their permanent home, the tribe celebrated him. They wanted to mark him as something different, not just a leader, not just a guide, something greater. So the tribe's metal workers took a thin band of hammered copper, decorated it with carved patterns of the sun and the moon, and placed it on Eredon's head, the first crown in history. It wasn't a symbol of power, not yet. It was a symbol of responsibility. From this small, fragile moment, a simple ring of copper given to a tired hunter, the entire idea of kingship was born. Kings would rise, empires would grow, dynasties would fall. But everything, from Egyptian pharaohs to medieval monarchs, from emperors in shining armor to rulers on golden thrones, all began with that single copper circle in a forgotten valley. And the world would never be the same again. The crown that was never meant to be. The storm that had gathered around the kingdom finally broke on the morning the council chose a new ruler. But the rain was gentle, almost hesitant, as if the sky itself were unsure whether to celebrate or mourn. Inside the great hall, Torches flickered against ancient stone walls, carved with the stories of kings long gone. Every ruler who had sat on the throne had believed they would be remembered forever. And yet, dust covered most of their names. At the center of the hall stood the ironwood throne, carved from the last tree of a vanished forest. It wasn't beautiful, nor was it meant to be comfortable. Kings were not meant to rest. They were meant to endure. The council members whispered among themselves, robes brushing the floor like restless shadows. They spoke of bloodlines. They spoke of prophecy. They spoke of fear. And then the doors opened. Prince Alaron, the king's youngest son, never trained for the throne, never expected to rule, stepped inside. There had always been two heirs ahead of him, but now both were gone, taken by the same civil war that had taken the king's life. Alaron looked nothing like a ruler. He was quiet, thoughtful, more scholar than warrior, more listener than command giver. But sometimes history does not want a conqueror. Sometimes it wants a witness. The council members studied him with narrowed eyes. Some saw weakness. Others saw potential. A few saw opportunity. An elder stepped forward. "Alaron," he said softly, "the crown comes to you not by desire, but by necessity." Alaron looked up at the throne, not with hunger, not with fear, just a deep understanding of the burden that waited there. "I never wished for this, but I will not turn away from what must be done." Silence fell, the kind that weighs on the bones. The elder nodded. "Then kneel." And so he did. The crown, cold, heavy, older than any living memory, was placed upon his head. In that moment, Alaron felt everything. The weight of every mistake his ancestors made, the expectations of a kingdom trying to heal, the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, a gentler ruler could reshape its future. When he rose, the hall seemed smaller around him, the world larger, the danger clearer. Outside, the storm ended. But inside the kingdom, another was only beginning. The young, unexpected king stepped forward, ready to face a history that had swallowed countless rulers before him, and determined to not be forgotten in the same way. The king who tried to outrun fate. The storm rolled in long before anyone noticed the clouds. Inside the stone-walled throne room of King Alistair IV, torches flickered restlessly, as if they knew something the humans did not. The king sat at the far end of the hall, hunched over a map of his kingdom, fingers pressed tightly against his temples. For weeks, strange signs had appeared across the land, animals fleeing the forests, stars shifting out of their normal paths, and whispers in the villages that fate had turned its face away from the crown. But the king refused to believe in prophecies. He believed in armies. He believed in walls. He believed in his own voice echoing through this hall since the day his father died. Tonight, however, doubt stood closer than any advisor. "Your Majesty," said the royal astrologer, stepping carefully into the room, "the omens have aligned again." "I do not care for omens," the king muttered. "Speak plainly." The astrologer swallowed. "A shadow rises in the east, a rival king claiming divine right, and the people, they whisper that the heavens favor him." Alistair's jaw tightened. "The heavens do not decide kings, men do." Yet even as he spoke, The wind howled through the corridor behind him, a cold, unnatural gust that snuffed out 3 torches at once. Both men froze. The map fluttered, the pieces on the king's warboard rattled, and the shadows in the room grew longer, darker, as though something unseen had stepped closer. The astrologer trembled. Majesty, fate cannot be outrun. But the king rose to his feet, slamming his fist on the table. Then let it chase me. I will build roads it cannot follow. He strode toward the balcony overlooking the city. Far below, the streets wound like veins, and beyond them, the mountains glowed faintly with lightning. A storm was coming, but not the kind that carried rain. This storm carried names, ambitions, and crowns, and fate. Fate was no longer a patient watcher. It was a hunter. And tonight, it had caught the scent of a king.
Morning light spilled across the kingdom like a reluctant messenger, revealing the scars of the night before. The palace courtyard still smelled of smoke. The banners that once fluttered proudly now hung in tatters, whispering of a world slipping out of royal hands. Inside the throne room, the surviving nobles gathered in thick, nervous silence. At the center of the room stood the crown of Eldros, a masterpiece of hammered gold and ancient gemstones, rumored to carry the weight of every king who had ever worn it. Once a symbol of unity, it now felt like a burden too heavy for any one life. Young King Ador stared at it, his reflection warped in the gold. The crown had changed him, everyone could see that. But now he looked tired, older, haunted. Ador ran his hand over the arm of the throne. 3 rebellions in a single year. My father ruled 40 years without a single uprising. A counselor stepped forward carefully. Your Majesty, your father ruled an older world, a quieter one. Times have changed. Ador's jaw clenched. No, people have changed. Outside, the kingdom groaned under drought, heavy taxes, failed harvests, and the distant drumbeats of foreign armies. The world was shifting, fast, and the throne was no longer a safe seat but a storm's eye. Ador's sister, Princess Lyra, approached him. Unlike the others, she spoke softly, almost like part of her voice had already accepted what was coming. Brother, she began, the northern lords refuse to send grain. The western cities talk openly of independence. The army is stretched thin. You cannot hold this alone. Ador's eyes hardened, not with anger, but with fear. What do they want? She hesitated. They want a king who listens, not one who commands. The court fell into a heavy silence. For centuries, the kings of Eltros had ruled from above, untouchable, unquestioned, unshaken. But the world was no longer built for silent thrones and unbreakable crowns. People wanted a voice. They wanted change. They wanted a future, one the old crown could not promise. Ador lifted the crown of Eldros and stared at its underside, the ancient inscription he had memorized as a child. A king does not own the kingdom. A king belongs to it. He had not understood it then, but now, as cities whispered rebellion and borders crumbled, he finally did. A tear slipped down his cheek. Lyra stepped closer. You don't have to fall with the crown, Ador. But Ador shook his head. It's not the fall I fear. It's what we leave behind. Outside, distant thunder rolled, but the sky was clear. It wasn't weather. It was armies, drawing closer.
The kingdom that once glittered with banners of gold and crimson now felt strangely hollow. The great halls, where kings had spoken with thunder in their voices, echoed with something new: uncertainty. For generations, the royal line had seemed unbreakable. Their power was woven into the land itself, in the rivers that fed the fields, in the towering fortresses built by ancestors long turned to dust, in the old songs whispered by grandmothers beside the fire. But now, something was shifting. Whispers crept through marketplaces, taverns, and barracks. The king is weakening. The nobles plot behind closed doors. The crown no longer shines as it once did. Even the sky seemed restless, heavy with clouds that refused to break. A kingdom without unity. While the people struggled to understand the distant tremors of power, those within the palace understood too well. The king's advisors, once united, had split into quiet factions. The Eagle Court, seeking to strengthen the army and seize new lands. The Laurel Council, preferring diplomacy and old alliances. The Silent Circle, whose motives remained shrouded in smoke-filled chambers and half-truths. Each group believed they alone could save the kingdom, yet their arguments only carved deeper cracks into the foundation of the throne. Even the king's most loyal general, Lord Ariston, sensed the danger. He stood at the palace balcony at dusk, armor dim in the fading light, watching smoke rise from distant villages. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "storms are gathering, inside and out." The king's reply was little more than a sigh. A threat from the borders. While the kingdom argued with itself, shadows moved along its edges. Reports arrived of distant war bands forming alliances. Old rival cities, once powerless, had begun to stir, testing the weakened borders. The old prophecy spoken by the kingdom's first seer resurfaced. The greatest fall comes not from the enemy's sword, but from the cracks within the crown. And now, for the first time, people began to fear the prophecy was unfolding. The unseen hand. Late one night, in a hidden chamber deep beneath the palace, torches flickered over cloaked figures. A voice, calm, measured, dangerous, filled the darkness. "The king has lost the people. The nobles are divided. Soon the throne will be ours to shape." A jeweled ring glimmered as the speaker lifted their hand. "Let the kingdom fall, for only after ruin can we build something new." And with that, the unseen hand behind the chaos tightened its grip. The fall of kings had begun, not with a battle, not with a coup, but with a whisper and a kingdom too blind to hear it.
The storm did not arrive with thunder. It arrived with silence. A strange, heavy quiet fell over the kingdom in the early hours before dawn, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. No birds sang. No wind stirred the banners along the palace walls. Even the guards spoke to one another in whispers, unsettled by a dread they could not name. Inside the throne room, King Aldrich sat alone beneath the towering stained glass windows. Their colored light washed over him like the judgment of forgotten gods. He had not slept. His advisors could see it in his eyes, but none dared to mention it. Laid across the table before him was the crown of Vespera, its once brilliant gems now dull, as though the crown itself knew the kingdom was slipping through his fingers. Aldrich lifted it gently. There was a faint, unmistakable crack running along the inner band. The symbol of the realm was broken. He closed his eyes. Not even the ancient crownsmiths had ever seen it damaged. The crown was said to be impossible to fracture, so long as the kingdom remained united. But the kingdom was no longer united. Rumors spread through the capital like quick-burning oil. The eastern nobles had withdrawn their oath of loyalty. The western clans had begun gathering in secret. The royal treasury was emptying faster than the advisors could conceal. And worst of all, Aldrich's younger brother, Prince Karen, had vanished without a trace. Some whispered defection, some whispered assassination, but most whispered civil war. Aldrich lowered the cracked crown with shaking hands. The weight of the realm felt heavier than armor. Then the doors burst open. General Malus, battle-scarred, fiercely loyal, strode inside. Her cape was soaked from the misty dawn. Her face was pale. "Your Majesty," she said, voice low, "it's begun." He rose slowly. "Speak plainly." She swallowed. "Scouts report torches on the ridge. Hundreds, perhaps thousands. They bear the sigil of your brother." The words struck like iron. Karen, alive, and marching toward the capital. Aldrich felt the last piece of his world tilt. "How long?" he asked. Malus glanced toward the darkening windows. "By nightfall." For a moment, the king said nothing. Then he straightened his shoulders, a ghost of the old fire returning to his eyes. "Prepare the walls," he ordered. "If my brother comes for the crown, he will find me waiting." Malus bowed and hurried out. Aldrich remained in the throne room a moment longer. He touched the fracture on the crown. Brother against brother, just as the prophecy foretold. The storm outside finally broke, but not with rain, with war.
The crown that could not save them. The throne room was quiet, too quiet. Gone were the roaring feasts, the glittering courts, the parades of jewels and silk that once defined the kingdom's power. Instead, the room felt hollow, like a grand shell left behind after the tide retreats. Dust slept on the carved throne. The tall windows breathed in cold air through cracked panes. A king once stood here. A king once ruled here. But a crown alone cannot hold up a kingdom. And now the weight of centuries was finally beginning to crack. A king in the winter of his reign. The last king paced slowly, leaning heavily on his staff. His beard, once dark and braided with gold, was now streaked with frost white. Each step echoed through the empty hall, reminding him of what had been lost. Half the treasury spent fighting wars no one remembers. Nobles feuding like hungry wolves. Famine creeping through the villages, and the people whispering that the crown had lost its blessing. He stopped before the throne, his throne, and laid a trembling hand on the armrest. It was carved with lions, symbols of courage and destiny. But courage had fled the kingdom long ago. Was it pride? Was it fate? Or perhaps both? Whispers of rebellion. Beyond the palace walls, the streets were restless. Merchants complained of broken trade routes. Farmers begged for relief from taxes. Soldiers muttered that the king was no longer strong enough to protect them. Even the once loyal palace guards exchanged worried glances. Rebellion doesn't begin with fire. It begins with silence, with unease, with too many questions and too few answers. And the silence in the kingdom had become deafening. Rumors spread like wildfire. A rival claimant to the throne. A forgotten prophecy.
a charismatic warlord gathering followers, a promised land beyond the mountains. Nobody agreed on the details. Everyone agreed on one thing: the age of kings was ending. A kingdom at the edge of night. The king returned to his private chamber, lit by only one candle. Maps covered the table: roads, borders, strongholds. Everywhere he looked, the ink told the same truth: his kingdom was shrinking. For the first time, he wondered whether the crown itself had been the curse. Every king before him had been swallowed by battle, betrayal, or despair. He had hoped to break the cycle, but cycles are stronger than hope. A knock echoed through the chamber. "Your Majesty," a servant whispered, "they've arrived." The king closed his eyes. He knew who they meant. The council, his last loyal advisors, or perhaps the ones preparing to replace him. He rose slowly. His crown glimmered faintly in the candlelight, an artifact, a memory, a burden. Tonight, decisions would be made. Some kingdoms fall from battle, others fall from within. This one, it was falling from history itself.
The last crown falls. The horizon glowed a deep bruised purple as dawn crept into the shattered capital. Crows circled above ruined towers, their wings slicing through the cold morning air like silent blades. Somewhere beneath the rubble, a crown, once the symbol of a mighty dynasty, lay half buried in dust. King Althamir stood alone on the balcony of his fractured palace, his cloak whipping in the wind. Below him, the once great city churned with smoke and distant cries. Victory songs had not been heard here in years, only echoes of what used to be. For the first time in his reign, he looked less like a king and more like a weary traveler, burdened with memories heavier than armor. Tonight, the enemy would break through the last gate. He knew it. Everyone knew it. But there was no panic in his eyes, only the stillness of a man who had fought for too long. Behind him, his daughter, Princess Illyra, stepped forward quietly. Her braids were undone, her armor scratched, but her spirit burned fiercely. "Father, we must flee before the walls fall." He shook his head gently. "The kingdom is more than stones and gold. If I abandon these people now, the crown will become a lie." She swallowed hard. "And if you stay, you will die." He smiled sadly. Every king does. A distant boom thundered across the valley. The final siege tower had touched the outer wall. Soldiers below shouted for positions. Horns wailed across the broken battlements like mourning beasts. There was no more time. Illyra grasped her father's hand. "Then let me fight beside you." But he placed the ancient crown in her palms, a crown not meant for victory, but for memory. "You must survive," he whispered. "A kingdom can be rebuilt, but a legacy lost is lost forever." Tears shimmered in her eyes as he turned toward the doors where his most loyal guards awaited their last stand. The king paused only once, glancing back with a final blessing. "Run, my daughter. Carry our story where swords cannot reach." And before she could speak, he marched into the crimson-lit hall, the echoes of clashing steel drawing closer. Princess Illyra fled into the tunnels beneath the palace, just as the enemy stormed the gates. Above her, the final roar of battle erupted like a dying star. When she emerged miles outside the ruined city,
She looked back. Flames climbed the sky. The great palace crumbled, and with it, the line of kings that had once shaped the world. The crown in her hands felt impossibly heavy. But even as the smoke rose, she whispered, "This is not the end. The story will survive."
The palace felt different now. Gone were the triumphant songs, the clatter of feasts, the bold trumpet calls that once proclaimed the king's approach. In their place lingered a quiet, uneasy stillness, like the air just before a storm breaks. The new king, Ariston II, walked through the Hall of Ancestors with measured steps. Every statue of a former ruler seemed to watch him, stone eyes burning with judgment. Their faces told a story he already knew too well. Power never stays gentle. He paused in front of the statue of King Theron, the Unifier, his legendary ancestor. "He united the broken kingdoms," Ariston whispered, "and I am barely holding one together." Behind him, the chamber doors creaked. Advisor Monarchs entered, his cloak whispering against the marble floor. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "another province refuses tribute." Ariston's jaw tightened. "That makes 3 this month." "4, Monarchs corrected. "Word travels quickly, especially when the throne looks uncertain." Ariston turned away from the statues. He hated how true it sounded. Since the death of his father, rebellions, once sparks easily extinguished, had become small flames. Now those flames were spreading. As they walked toward the council chamber, Monarchs lowered his voice. "There are rumors," he said. "Whispers that a pretender claims royal blood and vows to take your throne." Ariston stopped. His shadow stretched long across the polished floor. "A pretender?" he asked. "Or a puppet?" Monarchs hesitated. "A puppet with powerful hands behind him." In the council chamber, nobles waited like vultures circling a wounded stag. Their eyes were sharp, assessing, hungry. Ariston could feel their doubt pressing against him like a weight. When he sat on the throne, a silence fell, thick and heavy. "The kingdom is trembling," he announced. "If we do nothing, it will fall." "Perhaps," one noble said, "but a king who appears desperate invites attack." Ariston's voice sharpened. "And a king who appears weak invites conquest." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Then General Varro, a scarred man with a soldier's blunt honesty, stepped forward. "Say the word, Majesty. I'll put down these rebellions before they spread." But Ariston shook his head. "Steel alone cannot fix what pride and greed have broken. We need more than armies. We need unity." Varro bowed, but his eyes revealed doubt. Later that night, alone in his chamber, Ariston looked out across the darkened kingdom. Fires flickered in the distant hills, signals, rebellions, warnings. The sky above churned with gray clouds. He rested his hand on the window frame and whispered, "Father, how did you hold a kingdom together when the world insisted on tearing it apart?" There was no answer, only the low rumble of distant thunder. Ariston turned away, tightening his cloak. A king's fate was never shaped in daylight. It was shaped now, in the shadows, and the shadows were growing.